Please be seated. The sitting is resumed. I now give the floor back to Mr. Eichler to continue with his presentation.
Thank you, Mr. President.
You have the floor.
I had said just before the break that the overwhelming body of evidence, all of it, confirms and corroborates the reliability, trustworthiness, and credibility of the FFM's fact-finding reports. And this includes the witness statements obtained by the IIMM. As you have been told, the IIMM provided 42 signed witness statements to the parties with the names redacted. The Gambia attached 12 of them to its reply, and Myanmar annexed 19 to its rejoinder. Their counsel claimed that we submitted only 12 because the others do not support our claims. That is just nonsense. Let's examine what those witness statements actually say, starting with those submitted by Myanmar. I think you will find that these witness statements not only support the Gambia's claims, but they confirm and corroborate the findings of the FFM and attest to the reliability and credibility of its two reports. You will find excerpts from 9 of Myanmar's IIMM witness statements at tab 17 of your folders. I will show you some of them. First is witness P1235, a man from Chutpin, one of the 3 villages where we have shown that the particular circumstances establish Myanmar's genocidal intent. He describes the scene when the Tatmadaw first arrived at the village on 17 August. I'm sorry, I think that is an error. It's 27 August, 2017. After the Azan for Zohor prayer time, soldiers, police, Rakhine people, everyone started coming in the village. I came out of the tea stall and looked toward my house. I could see hundreds of soldiers coming in from the north side of the village, running like a big herd of cows toward us. It looked like darkness was coming. They were all wearing the same color, the regular scarves around their neck, red color, with rifles in their hands. Some had helmets, some had hats. I took shelter inside someone's house with approximately 60 other people. Military personnel surrounded us and started shouting, "You," an epithet which I put only in a footnote. I would not speak the word in this court. "You, epithet Bengali, come out." Not the women, only the men come out. Because no one was going out, the soldiers started talking to their seniors through wireless devices with an antenna. We could hear them and understand what they were saying. The house we were hiding in was a bamboo house with walls made of bamboo and leaves as roofs, so you can hear and even see from the inside. Militaries were everywhere. We could hear and feel that they kept coming inside the village. They were saying, quote, "We told the people to come out, but no one has come out. What should we do?" We heard pretty loud from the radio, "Ain go mi sho," which means set fire to every house. As soon as this was said, they started shooting and setting fire from the west side of where we were. We could hear the noise of firing, and when we tried to watch, we could see that they were coming toward us as well as setting fire in front of us. They started firing launchers. This is from their evidence, annexed to their written pleadings. IIMM witness P1239 is another man from Chutpin, which the Rohingya call Shuap Prang, and who went to help his neighbors recover the bodies of loved ones after the Tatmadaw attacked that village. The bodies had bullet wounds and scars from knives. I saw the body of one pregnant lady who had been cut open with a knife, and the baby had come out of the body. I also found 2 of her sons dead. Including the unborn child, the mother and 3 children were killed. The older child was a 4-year-old, and the younger one was a 2-year-old. Then there was the one who came out of the womb. They were sprayed with bullets. The same witness described what happened to the women of the village of Chetpin. The harassing and rape of women happened when they started burning the settlement of people from Sofarang and during the attack on Shua Prang, that's Chetpin. Women didn't tell me this directly, but they told other women, and that's how I found out. Even if houses were burned and people were injured, Rohingya people would have stayed. But when the women started talking about this rape and mistreatment, that was the thing that made the community decide to leave our homeland. These women would not make something like this up. No one would want such dishonor. This, too, is their evidence. And so is this, from witness P1622, a man from Indin, who described events when the Tatmadaw arrived on 29 August 2017, a time when there was no claimed ARSA attack or presence, and the soldiers began shooting indiscriminately. I was at home and the situation was terrible. When things were in motion, I felt like it was the judgment day. I was so terrified I didn't even notice where my wife or children were. When I remember those days, I lose control. They treated us like ants. We walk on them without even realizing. We don't care about their lives if they die. They were treating us like ants, killing us like ants, like animals, as if we are not human. The same witness described this scene. The militaries and the Rakhine started mistreating the women. They teared their clothes off and burned them. The girls were completely naked. They started grabbing them by the breasts, pulling them by the hair, pushing them to the ground, and kicking them badly. They took whatever they had on them. They did not rape them. They called the girls Ma'ailu. The English version of this epithet is in a footnote. I won't speak the word. I will skip paragraph 42 in the interest of time, but it is testimony from IIMM witness P147, a woman from Gujarpin, which is in the record and available to you, another of the witness statements put into the record by Myanmar. IIMM witness P2892 is a woman from Mongnu, another of the villages we addressed in detail in the first round. Because our time is limited, I will end with this one. But I could go on reading from all of Myanmar's 19 IIMM witness statements, not to mention the 12 submitted by the Gambia. This woman states, soldiers came quickly to take my 2 sons, who were about 9 and 12 years old, respectively, at the time. The soldiers also grabbed my sister's 3-year-old child from someone's arms, and threw the child onto the muddy ground. My sons were holding on to me tightly, screaming, and kissing me on the cheeks. The soldiers then snatched them away, taking the scarf off my head and using it to bind the hands of my son behind his back. I last saw my 2 sons when they were made to lie face down on the ground in a row with the other men, 12 and 9 years old. The soldiers led us women away towards another house, and I never saw my 2 sons again. Mr. President, it is worth re-emphasizing that these are excerpts from the witness statements introduced by Myanmar. It is their evidence. Of course, we invite you to read all 31 statements in their entirety. We are confident you will find that this IIMM evidence fully supports, confirms, and corroborates the findings of the FFM and provides further justification for treating those findings as trustworthy, reliable, credible, and conclusive. So too for the IIMM's analytical report on the destruction, dispossession, of Rohingya land and property during the 2017 clearance operations. Myanmar made considerable effort to keep this document out of the record, and we can understand why. But as a readily available public document, they had no basis for excluding it. You will find it at tab 7. At paragraph 6 of this report, the mechanism provides its analysis of 7 Rohingya villages. The mechanism selected these locations because they demonstrate a systematic pattern whereby villages and farmland were destroyed and razed between late 2017 and early 2018 and were rapidly supplanted by BUP battalion bases. Remember, they told you in their first round that the clearance operations only lasted a few days. According to the FFM and the IIMM, these clearance operations in 2017 and 2018 lasted for months. In his affidavit, Assistant Secretary General Kumjin attests that the mechanism, quote, has collected 111 witness statements which have information broadly relevant to the 2016 or 2017 clearance operations and or the broader situation in Rakhine State or relevant structures of the Myanmar military and other security forces. Of these, he states, quote, 97 statements have been of Rohingya witnesses. The complete affidavit of Mr. Kumjin is at tab 18. Last month, Mr. Staker showed you this excerpt from Mr. Kumjin's affidavit in respect of the 12 IIMM witness statements submitted by the Gambia, and we thank him for doing so. While these represent a small portion, that is, the 12 witness statements submitted by the Gambia from the IIMM, while these represent a small proportion of the mechanism's relevant evidence and a small proportion of the evidence that the mechanism has shared with both parties to these proceedings, I am satisfied that they are broadly consistent and representative of the mechanism's other evidence from witnesses and other sources pertaining to the incidents. Mr. Staker's response was to attack all the evidence from the IIMM, including the 19 witness statements that his own client submitted, on the grounds that the Assistant Secretary General is biased in favor of the Gambia. In support of this unfortunate and unbecoming assertion, which I invite him to retract, he pointed to the affidavit itself, which he claimed was submitted in support of the Gambia. This is another misleading statement. As the court will recall, the Gambia included Mr. Kumjin on its witness list so that he could inform the court about the work of the IIMM. The court required an affidavit from him in case he were to testify. Mr. Kumjin complied. But then the Office of Legal Affairs decided that he should not testify to avoid any doubt about his impartiality. Mr. President, there is no reason to question Mr. Kumjin's independence or his integrity. His background and his experience is described in his affidavit, which is in the record and is included in our judge's folder. I will skip the paragraph in which I go through that in the interest of time. There is no basis for questioning his credibility or his expertise or his deep experience in proving international crimes before international criminal tribunals. Nor is there any reason to doubt Mr. Kumjin's testimony about why the Rohingya express fear about giving their statements or having their identities revealed. Show that? Almost across the board, witnesses who raised concerns about the sharing of their information tied these concerns to their cooperation with judicial proceedings being made known to the governmental or military authorities of Myanmar, the same authorities they believe have persecuted and subjected them to serious international crimes in Myanmar. These concerns have not ameliorated over time as the violence and commission of serious international crimes have continued to escalate in Myanmar, including in Rakhine State. There is absolutely no reason whatsoever to give any credence to the argument by Myanmar's counsel that evidence provided by Rohingya witnesses was unduly influenced by a fear of ARSA and should therefore be given no evidentiary weight. To the contrary, it took great courage on their part, as well as the protection offered to them by the FFM and IIMM, to overcome their fear of the Tatmadaw and tell their stories to the world in the hope that the world would listen and that some measure of justice would be provided to them. Mr. President, members of the Court, the IIMM witness statements and analytical reports and the affidavit of the head of the IIMM fully confirm and corroborate the findings of the FFM and provide further justification for the Court's reliance on the 2018 and 2019 reports. And that is not all. In the next part of my presentation, I will show how the reports of prominent, authoritative, and independent NGOs, signed witness statements, and the compelling witness and expert testimony you heard last week all further confirm and corroborate the findings of the United Nations FFM. They constitute powerful and persuasive additional support for the reliability and authority of the FFM's comprehensive reports. In so doing, I will expose the failure of Myanmar's attempts to discredit this evidence too. And I will do more than describe the evidence for you. I will show it to you. I begin with the investigation conducted by the Public International Law and Policy Group, PILPG, at the behest and with the support of the United States Department of State. The investigation included interviews in Bangladesh in February 2018 with 1,024 Rohingya witnesses and victims, almost as many as the 1,294 interviewed by the fact-finding mission. The report, published in December 2018, describes the investigation's methodology, and I will go through it as quickly as I can with you so that you can see the seriousness and the probity of this investigation. In February 2018, PILPG assembled an investigation team of 18 highly experienced and trained international investigators from 11 countries to conduct its investigation mission. This investigation team included former prosecutors and investigators from a range of countries and international criminal tribunals, former investigators from Darfur and South Sudan investigation missions, military and security experts, and international criminal accountability experts. Drawing from previous large-scale missions that investigated violence and crimes in Darfur and South Sudan, PILPG designed an investigation mission focused on systematically collecting first-hand accounts from a random and representative sample of refugees living in camps in Bangladesh. From March to April 2018, PILPG's investigators collected 1,024 interviews from Rohingya refugees in 34 refugee camps in eastern Bangladesh. According to the report, the methodology of the investigation included 7 key elements: the assembly of a highly experienced team of international investigators and trained interpreters to conduct the mission, the random selection of respondents throughout all the refugee camps and settlement areas, interviewing only persons above the age of 18, interviewing only respondents who had fled Myanmar since October 2016, collecting only first-hand accounts of human rights violations suffered or witnessed, that is, not documenting hearsay, a standardized interview format and approach to information collection and interview coding according to alleged perpetrator, crime, and location. The qualifications of the investigators and the sophisticated methodology employed gave assurances of the PILPG's independence, competence, and reliability. The investigation led to the following conclusions. The unanimous finding of all 18 investigators who took part in the mission was that the major attacks on the Rohingya leading directly to their displacement involved a premeditated and well-coordinated operation. The mass killings and accompanying brutality, including against children, women, pregnant women, the elderly, and those crossing the border to Bangladesh, further suggest, however, that at least in the minds of some perpetrators, the goal was not only to expel, but also to exterminate the Rohingya. As one investigator concluded, while one can debate whether Burma's goal was to exterminate the Rohingya or merely push them out of the country, there were striking examples that indicate a possible desire to go far beyond pushing the population into Bangladesh. I was struck by the mass murder of Rohingya, even once they were about to enter Bangladesh. I heard several reports of hundreds or thousands of people being killed with bombs and guns while waiting on the riverbank to cross into Bangladesh. I also heard reports of military speedboats purposely running into canoes full of refugees, which would then tip over and everyone would drown. In both of these examples, the Burmese had basically achieved their desire to force the Rohingya into Bangladesh, yet that wasn't sufficient. Instead, they preferred the Rohingya dead. As Mr. Suleiman told you, the PILPG report considered whether the clearance operations could have been an authentic counterinsurgency response. The pretense of a clearing operation to protect the state from a Rohingya terrorist insurgency threat rings hollow in the face of so much of this data. The U.S. State Department published its own analysis of the evidence collected by the PILPG. It illustrated this in a series of charts, two of which I will display for you. On this one, you will see the percentage of respondents who reported specific destructive acts. 82% reported witnessing hut and village destruction. The same percentage reported witnessing killing. You will see that 51% reported witnessing sexual violence. The second chart is a map showing rape and gang rape witnessed across northern Rakhine State during the clearance operations and who the perpetrators were. As you can see, rape and gang rape were perpetrated across a broad geographic region, almost the entirety of northern Rakhine State. The vertical bar on the left shows that 81% of these rapes and gang rapes were perpetrated by the Tatmadaw, and almost all the rest by other Myanmar security forces. This is a partial response to a question from Judge Charlesworth about the locations where sexual violence occurred. A fuller response will be given by Mr. Lowenstein. The next investigation was conducted jointly by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and Fortify Rights. Referring to the clearance operations in October 2016 and August 2017, the report states that investigators traveled to Rakhine State, that is, they went into Myanmar, and areas along the Bangladesh-Myanmar border before and during both rounds of military-led attacks on civilians. Fortify Rights visited locations along the Naf River, which separates Myanmar and Bangladesh, refugee camps in Bangladesh, forested enclaves on the border, and villages where Rohingya survivors sought refuge. This report is based on more than 200 in-depth, in-person interviews, documented primarily by Fortify Rights, with Rohingya survivors and eyewitnesses of atrocity crimes, including more than 100 Rohingya women, as well as aid workers. The report included these findings. Over the past year, Fortify Rights and the Simon Scott Center of the U.S. Holocaust Museum documented how the Myanmar Army, Air Force, police force, and armed civilians carried out an unprecedented, widespread, and systematic attack on Rohingya civilians throughout northern Rakhine State with brutal efficiency. Eyewitness testimony documented in this report reveals how Myanmar state security forces and civilian perpetrators committed mass killings. State security forces opened fire on Rohingya civilians from the land and sky. Soldiers and knife-wielding civilians hacked to death and slit the throats of Rohingya men, women, and children, and Rohingya civilians were burned alive. Soldiers raped and gang-raped Rohingya women and girls and arbitrarily arrested men and boys en masse. The report continued. Satellite imagery corroborates eyewitness testimony describing how Myanmar authorities and others razed Rohingya-owned homes and properties throughout northern Rakhine State, destroying hundreds of villages and entire village tracts. Excuse me. The report concluded, there is mounting evidence to suggest these acts represent a genocide of the Rohingya population. Fortify Rights also conducted a separate investigation based primarily on 254 interviews with eyewitnesses and survivors of human rights violations, as well as with Myanmar military and police sources, Myanmar military analysts, members of ARSA, Bangladesh military and government officials, a Rakhine Buddhist monk, and international and local humanitarian aid workers. Fortify Rights also reviewed visual elements, including films and photographs from northern Rakhine State, acquired from original sources as well as open source media. Information that could not be adequately corroborated or triangulated was not included in this report. The report found the Myanmar authorities' preparations for mass atrocities culminated in horrific, coordinated, and systematic attacks against Rohingya civilians throughout the 3 townships of northern Rakhine State. For several weeks, the Myanmar Army, police, and non-Rohingya civilians raided hundreds of Rohingya villages, committing massacres of men, women, and children, systematic rape of women and girls, mass arbitrary arrests of men and boys, and widespread and systematic arson attacks. Conservative estimates suggest that in the span of a few weeks, soldiers and police, with the support of armed non-Rohingya civilians, killed at least several thousand Rohingya civilians, if not tens of thousands, from hundreds of villages throughout the 3 townships of northern Rakhine State. This may sound repetitive to you, Mr. President, members of the court, but it's necessary to show that all of these investigations reached the same findings and conclusions as the UN fact-finding mission. Physicians for Human Rights, another authoritative and highly esteemed NGO, published several reports on the events in northern Rakhine State. One of them addressed sexual violence against Rohingya women and girls. For this study, Physicians for Human Rights, PHR, conducted one-on-one, semi-structured interviews with 26 healthcare workers working for a variety of humanitarian organizations who provided direct services to Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh for some period between August 2017 and August 2020. The research team included American and Bangladeshi social scientists and physicians who have experience documenting or responding to sexual and gender-based violence. The study concluded Sexual violence against the Rohingya in Myanmar was widespread and followed common patterns, according to accounts by healthcare workers who cared for the Rohingya refugees who fled to Bangladesh following the violence in Myanmar in 2017. These health professionals' narratives help corroborate and attest to patterns of perpetration of sexual violence by members of the Myanmar military and those in uniform, consistent with many other reports. Another report by Physicians for Human Rights was based on 3 field investigations in various refugee camps in Bangladesh, involving witness interviews and examination of forensic evidence. The report focused on Chut Pin, one of the particular villages we have highlighted, where genocide occurred. As stated in PHR's conclusion, this report focuses on the events that occurred in the village of Chut Pin as an example of what happened in dozens of villages in Rakhine State. The Rohingya villagers faced a host of human rights violations, including killings, detentions, and disappearances, physical assault involving beatings, stabbings, and mutilations, rape and other forms of sexual violence, and forced displacement in the form of looting and burning of homes. The next report is by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. The interview team gathered testimony in Bangladesh from 220 persons who had fled northern Rakhine State in the aftermath of the 2016 clearance operations, as well as audiovisual material and satellite imagery from UNICEF. The High Commissioner concluded, the testimonies gathered by the team, the killing of babies, toddlers, children, women, and elderly, opening fire at people fleeing, burning of entire villages, massive detention, massive and systematic rape and sexual violence, deliberate destruction of food and sources of food speak volumes of the apparent disregard by Tatmadaw and BGP officers that operate in the lockdown zone for international human rights law. In particular, the total disdain for the right to life of Rohingyas. Mr. President, I could show you at least 40 more reports from reputable, independent UN and NGO sources that support the Gambia's claims of genocide. They are all part of the evidence in this case. I refer you in particular to the reports of the UN Special Rapporteur, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and Save the Children, cited in footnote. But perhaps of particular interest and worth showing you here are the reports cited and relied on by Myanmar in its oral and written pleadings. As Judge Cleveland has pointed out, Myanmar cites these third-party reports in support of its own case, while claiming that the reports relied on by the Gambia, including from the very same sources, are entitled to no evidentiary weight. Here are some examples from the reports on which they rely. Again, please keep in mind that these excerpts are from their own evidence. The first of these is a report from the International Crisis Group published in December 2016. Myanmar cited it 52 times in their written pleadings. Ms. Laurie and Mr. Blum-Cooper cited it 25 times in their oral pleadings. Despite their heavy concentration on this report, they passed in silence over these findings concerning the 2016 clearance operations, the first wave. After the 9 October attacks, there were multiple reports of suspects being shot on sight, burning of many houses, looting of property, and seizure or destruction of food stocks, as well as of women and girls raped. Humanitarian agencies have been denied access to some 30,000 people in the sealed-off area, as well as 130,000 previously receiving life-saving aid, with few exceptions. In the same report, the International Crisis Group rejected Myanmar's denial of responsibility for these atrocities. Blanket denials, even of factual claims based on satellite imagery or international media reports from the ground of flight to Bangladesh, are not plausible and undermine the credibility of its other claims. Some counter-narratives clash with satellite data. For example, that local Muslim villages are torching their own homes to get international sympathy, or that it is ARSA's arson. Analysis of that data shows destruction of at least 1,500 buildings. This is in 2016. Some villages were systematically destroyed over days rather than isolated geographically dispersed events, as would be expected from individuals or small group hit-and-run attacks. Moreover, much arson took place during military operations when many troops were present, not only at the time of attacks, but over subsequent days. The ICG, on which they rely, also said this. Potentially even more serious is that the repeated blanket government denials, widely disseminated via the state media in English and Burmese, reinforce a climate of impunity for troops that is particularly dangerous in a context of widespread negative sentiments toward the Muslim population at all levels of the military and in society as a whole. The state media has published disturbing opinion pieces, for example, one that referred to the Rakhine state situation as caused by detestable human fleas that we greatly loathe for their stench. The International Crisis Group published another report in December 2017, following the second wave of the clearance operations in October 2017. Myanmar cited it 35 times in its written pleadings and 7 times at these hearings. But they did not tell you what the report concluded. A brutal military response that failed to discriminate between militants and the general population, followed by continued insecurity and restrictions that have imperiled livelihoods, has driven more than 624,000 Rohingya into Bangladesh. This is one of the fastest refugee exoduses in modern times and has created the largest refugee camp in the world. A large proportion of Rohingya villages in the area have been systematically reduced to ashes by both troops and local Rakhine vigilante groups that were equipped and supported by the military following the 25 August ARSA attacks. This is their evidence. Myanmar also relies heavily on an Amnesty International report of May 2018. It was cited 12 times in their written pleading and 5 times by Ms. Laurie, Mr. Blom-Cooper, and Mr. Staker. Early in the morning of 25 August 2017, ARSA, a Rohingya armed group, attacked around 30 security force outposts in northern Rakhine State. The Myanmar security forces, and in particular the military, responded to the attacks and subsequent clashes with an unlawful and grossly disproportionate campaign of violence marked by killings, rape and other sexual violence, torture, village burning, forced starvation tactics, and other human rights violations and crimes under international law, all of which has been well documented by Amnesty International and others. For Amnesty International, the military attacks, quote, targeted the entire Rohingya population and were, quote, both widespread and systematic. Mr. President, each of these investigations by PILPG and the U.S. Department of State, by Fortify Rights and the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, by Physicians for Human Rights, by the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and by Myanmar's own sources, the International Crisis Group and Amnesty International, by many other equally independent and authoritative international and non-governmental organizations, have made similar findings and reached the same conclusions. This is not by accident or coincidence. It is the result of highly professional, fact-finding investigations by the most experienced, reputable, and credible investigative bodies. As you will have discerned, and is in fact most obvious, these reports, individually and collectively, confirm and corroborate the findings and conclusions of the UN fact-finding mission in its comprehensive reports of 2018 and 2019, as well as the evidence from the IIMM. We say these reports in themselves are fully convincing and conclusive evidence of Myanmar's genocidal act and Myanmar's genocidal intent. But for anyone who might question whether the FFM reports in themselves satisfy the high standard of proof established by the court to hold a state accountable for genocide under the 1948 Convention, we ask you to consider the fact, and it is now an established fact, that all of these highly credible and reliable and trustworthy organizations have independently made the same findings and reached the same conclusions as the FFM. Thus, the FFM reports do not stand alone. Their findings and conclusions are fully confirmed and corroborated by the investigations and reports that these independent and authoritative organizations. Significantly, there are no independent investigations or reports that have been submitted by either party that contain contrary findings or contrary conclusions. Not even Myanmar can deny this. Their only defense is that our evidence is insufficient to prove the facts. That is plainly and demonstrably wrong. The evidence all points in the same direction, to only one point on the compass. We say the FFM reports themselves do reach the high evidentiary bar the court has set in its prior cases under the Convention. But in any event, the many independent and authoritative investigative reports that confirm and corroborate the FFM reports combine to lift it high over that bar, as does the witness testimony. As we said in the first round, the Gambia submitted signed witness statements from 48 victims and eyewitnesses. In 30 of them, the names were redacted because the witnesses feared retaliation by Myanmar. We submit that these are all fully credible, first-hand accounts of the widespread atrocities committed by the Tatmadaw against innocent civilians who were targeted because they were Rohingya. In the limited time available, I would have liked to show you the testimony of 4 of these witnesses, including some who had the courage to reveal their names. Their testimonies are consistent with those of all 48 witnesses and with the findings and conclusions of all the investigative reports you have received, including, above all, the 2 comprehensive reports by the UN fact-finding mission. Because time is limited, and I want to answer the questions posed by Judge Tomka and Judge Cleveland, I will give you their names and the references to the record. Rushan Ali, a teacher from Minji, another of particular villages we have brought to your attention, recounted the scene on the riverbank in which hundreds of Rohingya were trapped while trying to flee the mass murder that the Tatmadaw were perpetrating. He saw the murder of these helpless people trapped on the riverbank, including children. Citation will be in the record. Another witness from Minji gave further testimony about the killing of Rohingyas on the riverbank, attempting to flee to safety across the river. They were firing very much, shooting at everyone. In about 3 minutes, everyone had fell down. Some appeared to have been hit by 5 bullets. I estimated that there were about 700 to 800 people who were killed at that time on the beach. He saw about 10 to 12 children between 3 and 4 years old, barely walking, wandering around the beach. I saw them kicking the children, and after they had fell down, the military killed them by hitting them very violently with knives in their belly or by slitting their throats. The IMM provided one witness statement with a witness's name, Karim Ullah from Chutpin. He testified, "I heard the military soldiers saying, 'Mi shoet light, set fire,' and they started to set the houses in Shuak Prang," that's Chutpin, on fire. They were also shooting in all directions. There were so many bullets, they were like drops of rain. Amongst all the shooting and burning, people started fleeing from Shuak Prang toward the west, crossing the rice fields, because they couldn't flee to other directions because of the military. Villagers got shot while they were running away from the village. I saw the bodies of those people later that day. I was still hiding, because if they saw any man, they would shoot. Last week, Mr. President, you and the members of the court heard live testimony, subject to cross-examination, from 3 Rohingya victims and eyewitnesses who testified about the indiscriminate killing in their villages by the Tatmadaw, men, women, children, infants, the elderly, the extreme brutality inflicted on them, the rape and gang rape of women and girls, the burning of their homes and fields, the burning of entire Rohingya villages, and the killing of fleeing refugees, including children trying desperately to get to Bangladesh. Mr. President, we could have brought hundreds, if not thousands, of Rohingya witnesses to give similar testimony. But that is not the way the court operates, and enough is enough. The point is, the irrefutable point is, that Myanmar, through its military forces, targeted the Rohingya group because they were Rohingyas. And they did whatever they could to destroy them. You also heard from Professor Michael Newton, an expert on counterinsurgency. As you will certainly recall, he testified that the Tatmadaw violated every principle of counterinsurgency, including their own rules of engagement, systematically, in a widespread modus operandi consisting of attacking and killing Rohingya civilians indiscriminately, and the rest. He testified this can only be explained by a pre-planned operation that targeted Rohingya civilians with the intention of destroying them as a group. Myanmar, as Professor Sands has told you, has not offered any expert testimony in rebuttal. Mr. Suleiman will speak more about this in the afternoon session and demonstrate again that Myanmar's actions against the Rohingya civilian population cannot possibly be considered counterterrorism as they claim. Professor Sands and I will return tomorrow to demonstrate that Myanmar's actions manifestly reflect an intention to destroy the Rohingya as a group, in whole or in part, and that this is the only reasonable inference, the only reasonable conclusion that can be drawn from the evidence, the totality of the evidence. Mr. President, I will conclude by giving the Gambia's responses to the question from Judge Tomka and the first question from Judge Cleveland. Judge Tomka asked the Gambia to, 1, outline the methodology it employed to verify witness evidence it received from other entities, including whether the Gambia has access to the identities and personal information of witnesses whose statements were supplied by third parties, and 2, explain what safeguards were in place to ensure that multiple statements relied on as corroborative did not, in fact, originate from the same source. The Gambia received 44 of its witness statements from Legal Action Worldwide, 1 from Fortify Rights and 3 from journalists based on their personal observations. It also received 42 witness statements from the IIMM, 12 of which it placed into the record. The Gambia verified the witness statements received from Legal Action Worldwide and Fortify Rights by satisfying itself as to the methodology used by those entities to obtain the statements, including assurances that the statements reflected the true and honest testimony of the witnesses, who fully understood the contents and willingly signed the statements. The witnesses were not anonymous. The Gambia was aware of their names and other personal information, just that the names were redacted from the versions submitted to the court in 30 of these cases at the witness's request for reasons of protection that I've already given. The statements of the journalists were obtained directly by the Gambia. The statements received from the IIMM were also signed by the witnesses, but the IIMM redacted their names for the witnesses' protection, save in one case, as I've mentioned. In terms of safeguarding against multiple statements from the same witness, because the Gambia had the names of all the witnesses whose statements were submitted to the court, except for the IIMM witnesses, it checked each of the statements to make sure it was from a different witness. We made one error, submitting the same witness statement in both our memorial and reply, not two statements from the same witness, but two copies of the same statement. And when we confirmed this, we notified the court and withdrew the second statement from the record. After receiving the 42 witness statements from the IIMM, we looked for matches between those statements and the statements from the other sources that we submitted. Since the names were redacted from the IIMM statements, and we received them a very short time before we filed the reply, this was challenging. It turned out that there were two matches between the 12 IIMM statements that we annexed to the reply and those we obtained from law and attached to the memorial. After submitting the reply, we asked law whether any of the witnesses whose statements we submitted with the memorial had been interviewed by the IIMM, and we were informed that only these two had met with the IIMM. We then wrote to the court on 1 July 2024 to inform it of these two instances and sought to make corrections to the reply under Article 52, Paragraph 3 of the rules, to make clear that in two of the paragraphs of the reply, we were referring to a single witness's testimony rather than two different witnesses. Finally, in one instance in which we received a signed witness statement from law, the same witness's account was included in a collection of interview notes provided by law. The Gambia relied only on the signed witness statement in its written pleadings and did not rely on or cite to the interview notes. Accordingly, in none of the four instances mentioned by Myanmar, nor in any other, did we rely on a second statement from any witness as confirmation or corroboration of other statements or for any other purpose. Myanmar's counsel argued that in the two instances in which there are witness statements from the same individual, there are contradictions. This is an exaggeration. To be sure, the statements given to the IIMM are longer and more detailed, especially in regard to ARSA. There are also some minor differences in the details provided about the Tatmadaws' attacks on their villages, as would be expected when a witness gives statements 3 years apart, as happened here. But there are no significant inconsistencies in these statements concerning the Tatmadaws' activities in their villages. There is no cause to doubt either of the two witnesses' credibility, and certainly no cause to doubt the credibility of the other 42 witness statements obtained by law. Mr. President, I turn to Judge Cleveland's first question, which was addressed primarily to Myanmar, but both parties were invited to respond. Judge Cleveland pointed out that Myanmar, as I said earlier, relied on evidence from the FFM reports, NGO reports, and media articles to support its assertions about ARSA, while at the same time objecting to the Gambia's reliance on the same or similar sources to prove its claims. In the Gambia's view, this is indeed a glaring contradiction, if not an exercise in hypocrisy. And this undermines Myanmar's objection to the credibility and weight of the evidence relied on by the Gambia from the same sources, especially the FFM and NGO reports. However, in addition to these independent sources of evidence, Myanmar relies and places its primary and almost all of its reliance on matters pertaining to ARSA on the Tatmadaws' own reports of alleged engagements with ARSA. It relies on these reports almost entirely for the alleged locations of ARSA attacks, which it numbers at figures much, much higher than reported by the FFM. The number of ARSA combatants, the weapons used, the number of terrorists killed, all dependent on the Tatmadaws' own internal reports. In its oral pleadings, it relied almost exclusively on these internal Tatmadaw reports. During Mr. Blum Cooper's discussion of 7 Rohingya villages that we highlighted in the first round, citing these Tatmadaw reports 34 times. And Ms. Laurie's speech on the 46 other Rohingya villages cited these Tatmadaw reports and relied on them almost entirely 35 times. They also relied repeatedly on self-serving statements by the Myanmar government and articles from the government-controlled media. In the first place, none of these sources can be regarded as independent. They are statements by a party made in its own interest. In the second place, as Professor Newton explained, military engagement reports are notoriously unreliable and self-serving, not only in Myanmar, but around the world. Field officers do not report their war crimes or other violations of the rules of engagement, and superior officers don't want to hear about them. Sizes of the attacking force, numbers of them killed, are also notoriously unreliable, as is whether engagement with the enemy actually took place. Professor Newton testified that this notorious unreliability is attributable to the reporting officer's self-interest in inflating his unit's achievements by inflating the number of attackers, the weapons they carried, and the number killed. As examples, he cited the horrific attack by U.S. Marines on civilians at Haditha in Iraq, and the infamous and grossly inflated body counts reported by U.S. forces during the Vietnam War. We therefore urge the court to treat any evidence presented by Myanmar that is sourced in the Tatmadaws' own reports or in written or in witness statements taken from its own officers, or in the accounts provided by Myanmar's state-controlled media, with extreme caution if it decides to treat with them at all. Thank you, Mr. President, members of the court. This completes my presentation. I am deeply, deeply grateful for your kind courtesy and patient attention to this long presentation. And this concludes the Gambia's submissions for this morning's session.
I thank Mr. Reichler, whose statement brings this sitting to a close. The oral proceedings in the case will resume this afternoon at 3 p.m., when the Gambia will continue its second round of oral argument. The sitting is closed.